Behind every success story, there is a long line of triumphs and defeats that remain hidden from others. These stories get condensed into journeys that minimize the struggle and wrap up with a happy ending. But we know that's not how life works. That's where From the Ashes with Mark Azoulay comes in. On today's show, you'll hear honest conversations about the challenges that Mark's guest faced and how they overcame adversity. Now, here is your host, Mark Azoulay.
Welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Mark Azoulay, and I'm here with returning guest Corey Flanders. We interviewed Corey last year about trauma that he experienced in a spiritual community. He talked about his Buddhist practice. He talked about his psychotherapy practice. And today we're talking about the hot topic, which is psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy. And Corey, I'm so happy to have you on because I want to hear from, both you being a client of this, right? Being a Buddhist practitioner, being a therapist. I think you have a really great perspective on what this new emerging field is. So Corey, welcome to the show.
Oh God, Mark, thank you so much for having me back on. It's so good to see you, man.
Yeah, it's good to see you too.
Yeah. Before I dive in, I just been hearing great things about you. You're living up in the mountains and enjoying life these days. Is that true?
Yeah, I moved up to Evergreen, which is like a mountain town 40 minutes outside of Denver. We just went through our first winter, which was ridiculous. The house came with a plow truck. So I've been learning how to plow, which was really funny because I fucked up my driveway for sure. Essentially you got to crash into stuff, but you crash into the right stuff, not the wrong stuff. We had a pipe burst. Bear season is starting, so I'm learning how to be a mountain man. It is making me like a harder man. I love it. I mean, some days are pure terror, but for the most part, I love it. It's awesome.
No, that's great, man. It makes me want to just stay here in Rhode Island, right next to the beach.
Right, exactly.
No bears, no plowing.
Yeah, I'm trying to build a beautiful home in a hostile environment,
Right.
I was just out last weekend grinding up some stumps and chopping down trees. That's, good man points, I think.
That's amazing, man. I have to visit you sometime.
100%. Yeah, I'd really like that.
That's great.
So tell us a little bit about your MDMA experience. What prompted it, what you were thinking about going into it, and run the story back.
Yeah, I think, last time I was on the show, I was talking about, as you mentioned, the trauma that I, sort of incurred in the spiritual community. But really over the past year or so, I've become more, everybody's into psychedelic assisted psychotherapy these days, right? Mm-hmm. Everybody's talking about it. Many therapists I know are doing it, from the side of experiencing it. But I had noticed for many years that whenever I would get around anybody who would talk about psychedelics or drugs generally, I would have a really intense, I would call it a PTSD response in my system. I would get really super activated and really fearful. And I actually know where that comes from. When I was 18 years old, I had a very powerful LSD trip that I did with friends. And there was no notion of, these days we talk a lot about set and setting, right? What's the right mindset? And then where are you doing these things? Are you safe, right? Back then, being 18, sort of on my own in college for the first time, it was mindset was I don't know, just give it to me, and setting was wherever we felt like going. So I had a really extraordinarily bad trip during that time. For the first 12 hours, it was blissful and wonderful. And then my friends left me alone. They had to go home. And I ended up for another 12 hours really just stuck in fight or flight, and frantic to get out of it and having no way of getting out of it. So I knew that was where this activation would come from whenever I would hear anybody even talk about, smoking weed, for instance, and cannabis use now is everywhere. Sometimes I'd even smell it on the street, which you can smell all over the place. And I would get this response. So I had been reading stuff, and I ended up watching How to Change Your Mind on Netflix, that Michael Pollan based series. And the first episode was about MDMA, and they talked about how it could really help with PTSD. And they were finding this and doing research on this. And I really just kind of had this research question, a personal research question come up in my mind, which was, could one of these drugs, empathogen like MDMA or entheogen like psilocybin, LSD, could it help to actually undo the PTSD that a drug like that had caused? So that was really what set me down in the path. Because with all the activation, I could also see this interest in me. I really do believe that it's doing a lot of good for people. And as a spiritual practitioner, what's the old book by Aldous Huxley? The Doors of Perception.
Yeah.
Right. I can see, and I could see even my initial LSD trip, right? It takes away the veils and something is seen or heard from beneath. And I knew the potential of it, but the PTSD was standing in my way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what inspired you to reach out to a practitioner and try to overcome it, right? Because that's a big step in of itself, just making that first phone call and being like, I'm going to confront this traumatic memory rather than just try to avoid it, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think people around me, a few people were getting good benefit from it, and I was hearing, stories about it. So that was something. And I think, that piece of just knowing that there's something there for me. I think in Tibetan Buddhism, we often talk about, and I don't really practice in Tibetan Buddhism anymore, but I had for so many years. And we often talk about preparing for death, right? And working through your stuff. And I could tell this fear in me was a big obstacle for a deeper freedom just in my waking life, right? And I could see the implications as I'm getting older now, moving through my 50s. And as I'm getting older, I can see the implications for, when I start to, go toward the big D. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to do the work. I mean, it's kind of what I'm about. It's what spiritual work is about in a way, right? Like getting rid of the stuff that binds you and learning freedom.
Yeah.
So that was really where I was coming from with it. And that's what caused me to reach in that direction.
Okay. Yeah. So walk us through what was the process like when you were on it. I'm assuming, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that you hadn't done MDMA before. Is that like your first experience with the drug?
I had done MDMA, probably 3 times. I had done ecstasy 3 times back in, when I was at the University of New Mexico years ago in my early 20s. But, this stuff's cut with, meth, basically.
Yes.
And the first time was fairly pleasurable and kind of eye-opening. But then the second and third time, it was felt like I had been like, I don't know, like snorting like sort of ant poison or something. Like I was like on fire and angry for hours and hours and hours. And so never went back to it. And so anyways, I had heard there was a woman that I know is a deep friend from back in my Buddhist days. And she is, she's 69 or so now. And she had just done MDMA, and I was talking to her and I said, do you have any names of, people that, who did you use? Do you have anybody that might be close to me? So she gave me a couple of names, and I just reached out to somebody, and they got back to me right away. And that's just started the process. I want to say that I needed to find somebody. I could tell that I needed to find somebody who was probably going to be a female and was probably going to have a nurturing quality to them and a very holding quality due to the nature of the fear. Like I have therapist friends who are males who are, this isn't really gendered, but they happen to be males. And there's a way in which I think males, in order to individuate or get away from their parents or, find their way forward, they're out in the woods or, off doing drugs together, getting fucked up. And So some of the therapists I know are still kind of doing these things that way.
Yeah.
And I could just tell that that was the wrong way. It wasn't the right holding environment, the right mindset for me. But I was just really lucky that this clicked. And she was also very skilled at doing trauma work in the early going. So we spent 3 or 4 sessions, full sessions, without me doing anything, just doing a little bit of trauma work, me feeling more safe with her. And she also was the one who steered me away from psilocybin and said, like, why don't we just get something on board in your system, a molecule that's actually going to put your fear centers to sleep and will flood you with serotonin and dopamine and those sort of happy chemicals that we have inside of us. So it was a good fit, and we made the plan to go forward with MDMA, and she just walked me through it and all that. So set a date, and then it took about 6 weeks, and then I went to go see her and had my experience, which I can certainly talk about. But it was mind blowing.
Yeah, tell me about the day. I mean, I love how she took her time with it, and it wasn't just like, let's just bang this out, or like you said, have this like jackhammer type approach, right? It sounds like it was real, like I think of like a massage approach, right? Where it's like, let's work the muscles, let's warm you up, like let's slowly kind of feel where the knots are, and then get in with right timing. I mean, maybe we'll talk about it later in the show, but there are so many ways that people are doing it, and similar to you, there's some that I respect and some that I think are actually quite dangerous. And it sounds like this practitioner was really cautious, which I think is great, right? I think it's really good. And it sounds like that's what your system responded to.
It was what I needed.
Yeah,
it was 100%. what I required in order to be able to actually continue to do the exploration. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and she used a little bit of IFS actually, which I'm not the hugest fan of, but it was kind of working in the way that she did it. And she even, said to the part of me that was so present and still terrified, right? I was allowed to bring that part forward, just talk from that place, like, you're freaking me out right now, or this is scaring me, or, what happens when, and she just, helped us center that part in a way and just say, like, listen, even in the experience, this resistance is the thing that we can actually just invite in and give as much love as you want to give it. And when she said that, like, that part just calmed right down and made more room for the experience to actually happen. Mm-hmm. So, just to walk you through a little bit of the actual experience, because there's drug fear, right? There was still some parts of me, that inside were freaked out. So I get up to the place, we get in there. She takes me up to the second floor to her room. It was a very nice room, but because of some of the PTSD I have around spiritual community, there was some Buddhist stuff, and that was kind of freaking me out. I think my hypervigilant mind was looking for ways to be freaked out, right? Yeah. So that was a little freaky. And then, we went through our process. She brought forward the medicine. And we had talked a lot about where it had been sourced. So they source with a chemist who does just this. And so it's not cut with anything. It's pure. And she had a couple of different dosing options. And she did this sort of like, little woo-woo-ish kind of thing where it's like, okay, hold one in one hand, one in the other hand. Try and determine which is the better fit for your
feel the vibe.
Feel the vibe. Yeah. And I felt the vibe, and mostly there was a lot of noise of anxiety, but strangely, the right hand wanted to be the one that, and it happened to be the largest dose too. So she dosed me, and it started to hit. And it took about an hour, and we were chit-chatting, talking, and it started to hit. And that's when the panic started to take over.
Yeah.
So I got kind of steamrolled at the very beginning. And really, I would just say that the really very first piece was feeling it come in so strongly that I actually got up out of the chair and hit the floor, like got down on my hands and knees. And then my initial reaction was like, oh, fucking no.
Yeah, like I made a big mistake.
A big mistake, because it was really strong.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I made a big mistake. I hit the ground, and I was thinking to myself, I sort of had this experience of, in Buddhism, sometimes they talk about like the vessel of the self being broken open, and the nature of mind has always been always around us, and it's the individual pot that breaks, and now we become sort of one, and we recognize that our mind is everywhere, right? Our essential nature is vast and all inclusive. So it was a little bit like that. When I hit the ground, I felt like a vessel that was trying to contain the universe. Yeah. And it was a scary experience. But then the vessel broke. And as that, experience shifted, which it did very dramatically, suddenly all fear was gone. Mm-hmm. And I was sitting on the floor, and I was in bliss. It was a blissful experience. And there's two things that I said as she came over. She was always taking copious notes throughout. The first one was, and most of this I learned after the fact. I said, if I get afraid again, will you remind me to be patient? So that was the first thing I said. And the second thing I said was, I feel like I'm moving through the cosmos as the cosmos. So it was a profound spiritual experience right out of the gate. That was in keeping with, so much I had, experienced before in meditation, but, you read about. It's like these drugs have a tendency to push us right into the deepest spiritual experiences, and thankfully I was also ready for that and prepared for that with all the practice I had done, where I wasn't ready for it when I was 18.
Right. Yeah. Was it overwhelming, or like, is that trying to resist it, trying not to break? Right.
Right. And as an 18-year-old, it's like you're not skilled, right? You believe your mind completely. And that was, the terror got overwhelming, and I couldn't make it stop. And that was, I think, the sort of the thing that set the PTSD in my system.
Mm-hmm. Well, that sounds like a really powerful experience. We're going to move to our first commercial break. When we come back, I want to hear about the after effects and what you've taken from that, right? And just kind of how that lived with you today. So if you're listening, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you on the other side of the commercial break.
Voice America is on LinkedIn. Connect with us today.
In Mark's work with high performers and business owners, it is becoming increasingly clear to him that their biggest obstacle to success is themselves. They are experts in their field, but are dragged down by their anxiety, poor time management, inability to focus, or self-sabotage. His role is to help you overcome these emotional and organizational issues so that you can truly excel in your business and your personal life. One of the most common hurdles that he sees is perfectionism, a crippling anxiety around performance. It's a fear of not being good enough, being publicly embarrassed, or of disappointing others. These fears paralyze brilliant people and bring them to their knees. This course will help you to break free from this mental prison and have more agency in your world. In this online course, we will break down the prison of perfectionism so that you can break out of it. For more information and to sign up, visit mark-azulay.teachable.com. That's Mark, MARC-Azulay, AZOULAY.teachable.com.
It's your world. Motivate, change, succeed. VoiceAmericaEmpowerment.com.
You are listening to From the Ashes with Mark Azoulay. To reach the show today, please call 1-888-346-9141. That's 1-888-346-9141. Or send an email to podcast@mark-azoulay.com. Now, back to From the Ashes.
Welcome back to the show. I'm here with Corey Flanders, and we're talking about MDMA and psychedelic-assisted therapy. You know, Corey, as you were telling your story, I am just impressed that you did it with another person, right? Like that you had a guide there. You know, when I've had these experiences, maybe we'll talk about them later in the show. I've either done MDMA in like a large crowd, like a rave experience, which actually I feel safe in, like kind of anonymous, but around people, right? Or alone, right? I recently did a mushroom trip where I was completely alone, and I always feel safer alone, more in control or something. But I'm always curious about that relational aspect, because I think for me, I would be really hyper vigilant of the other person, or I don't know, it'd be weird. It'd be hard for me to fall apart in front of another person. There'd be a lot going on. So I'm just curious if that was a factor for you, and what the relational component brought out.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you're asking that, you know, because I think there was a huge component, and it was a surprising component, because I think part of me was like, sort of like, oh, I'll take that, and then that will go away. You know, I'll take that and the PTSD will be gone. Magic, you know. And when I, you know, as I said, I went down on the ground, hit the ground when it was hitting me, there was that piece of me sort of breaking apart. But then in the back of my mind, I was like, oh no, I have to fake this for her benefit.
Oh, like
it's going to be like 8 hours.
It's
right?
Faking. I want to make sure we understand. Like faking is like, I need to have a profound experience so she doesn't feel bad about herself. Like, is that
exactly?
Okay,
that's exactly it. Or not have a bad time.
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah,
not have a bad trip. Which is, you know, it somehow is related to exactly the state of mind I was in back when I was 18, because I was all alone, and what I felt was I couldn't go home to my mother because my mother was so anti-drug, you know, was very moralistic about it. So I sort of had that in my superego. Like, drugs are bad, they're really scary, they're really dangerous. Don't come here with that. You're not going to get any help or understanding with that. And that was the sort of relational parameter, or the attachment parameter, that sort of locked me into a sense of aloneness. And it came up right away, where it was like I was somehow responsible for her feelings, you know, the person I worked with, just like I had always been responsible for my mother's feelings. Or felt that way, you know, in case my mom's listening. I'm not saying that I was responsible for your feelings, Mom. But that's how it always felt. And afterwards, you know, I could go on to wax ecstatic about the actual experiences that I had. It just sort of waved through for hour after hour. And it was really delightful to be with her. But really what happened for me that became part of the deep work that is going to continue me moving in the direction of this work is I realized that alone piece is the thing that needs healing. So like when I was at the end of the MDMA trip, you know, we're talking, you know, 7 hours later or something, you know, I didn't want to leave. And I knew I had to go back to my Airbnb. I was going to come back the next morning for an integration session of a couple hours, but I didn't want to go.
Yeah.
Because it was going to replicate something that had occurred for me before. And it was almost like she had to like kick me out. And I was also taking care of her at the time, and I realized that she needed me to go, and then I had to go. And so I went and muscled, you know, white knuckled through it through most of the evening. I did okay. You know, I'm fine. I'm much more skilled than I was when I was 18, but it was still not comfortable, and it was scary. And I actually, the more I've been, sort of sitting with this, Mark, too, the more I, from a therapy standpoint, right? I mentioned the word superego, and we talk about the id and the ego and the superego. And I think, one of the things that these drugs do is they sort of like take all of that stuff away, and we're just with our deepest self. And then as our individuality starts to reassert itself at the end of the trip, it's like there are different layers of stuff. For me in particular, it was about this sort of mother superego that reasserted itself. And I was like, again, you've done the wrong thing. This is dangerous. Why did you do this? What if you can't put it back in the box? And that's the fear. That was the PTSD. Yeah. And for years and years and years, I thought it was the drug itself. But it was really the relational component of being alone that was the problem.
That's a really incredible insight, right? Like, and what you're saying, it's just to highlight it, right? I think drug experience, I've had it with long meditation retreat experience, coming back and reintegrating, like seeing those layers build back, right? And it sounds like for you, seeing that judgment voice come back on and be like, whoa, this wasn't here for 8 hours. And look how happy I was. And I must imagine it must have been so stark to just see those thoughts come back and to have the experience of what could life be like without that. Right.
Right. And also having this feeling like, not really even recognizing that wasn't me. Yeah. Those voices weren't me. They were just had been so strong in my life that I just take them for granted. Mm-hmm. That, these sort of fearful voices are telling me, they're pointing to some truth that I need to watch out for. Overarchingly, the reality was everything was great. I came back, I was perfectly safe, and I gelled up just fine. I went to work a couple of days later, and if anything, I'm the better for it. But I think this is the thing that's going to move me in the direction of the person I work with actually also does small groups. So I try to decide, like, how am I going to work with this? One of the ways I thought was I might have somebody that I really trust be there in the interim at the end of an individual trip and just take care of me for the 10 hours until we have our reintegration session. The other way is I think I'm going to go and actually, get into a group and be with people, stay with them. You finish the trip, then you spend the night together, you wake up, you do your integration together, so that there is always this sense of togetherness that I can explore. Because like you, I'm also I don't really do that togetherness so well. Like, I'm not very trusting, not a very trusting guy in that way. Yeah. It's been a long road.
Me neither. Yeah, it's really difficult for me to bring other people into a vulnerable space and to be taken care of, right? It's like, because it's true for you. Like, I resist it with everything I have, and it's something that I deeply want, right? Like, it's both.
Right. That's right. Yeah. Right. And I've, with my wife and my kid and now my 2 dogs, it's like been step by step, like letting down the guard and letting people in who are actually also trustworthy. Mm-hmm. Right. Like I always, I think distrustful people end up in relationship with people that want them to be different, and then, then get upset about that. And so then, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah. Yeah. So to bring you back to the MDMA, right? I'm curious. So, we set up this email or this podcast through email like months ago, right?
Yeah.
So I imagine this was a while back, and I'm curious, right? What are the long-term effects? Because I've heard some people say, it changed my life and it's great. Some people say, yeah, I thought about it for a month and then I just kind of went away. Some people are like, I'm really itching for another one, right? But I'm curious for you, what has the long-term outcome been like?
Yeah. And I've had my mind on this, and I've been watching myself and part of it is like, oh yeah, I don't want to really over attribute, effects, how my life is to that. But I think it's pretty, for me, it's pretty dramatic.
Can you remind, I guess, let me know and tell the listeners, how long ago was the experience?
Yeah, so the experience was at the beginning of November.
Okay. Yeah.
And so yeah, I've kept my mind on it, and I guess I'll just tell you what I think about it now, which is my mind has been getting clearer and clearer. I think right out of the gate, right out of the box, post experience, there was a layer. This to me points to the PTSD. There was a layer of anxiety that had been in my system that was the water I was swimming in. So I couldn't feel its presence until it was gone.
Mhm.
And as that was taken away, in the weeks following, I was like, wow, that's profound. I didn't realize I had been so amped up and so anxious. After that experience, that realization, within a month, I stopped drinking. And I'm not a heavy drinker, really. As I've gotten older, like, one or two beers on Friday kind of thing. I just really can't tolerate it. But I'll do it regularly, and I'm often depressed for a couple days afterwards. And for whatever reason, I was like, I don't have any taste for this at all anymore. And since that time, that was around the first of the year. Since that time, I've just felt my mind get clearer and clearer and clearer, less kind of bipolarism, less super amped and then depressed I don't have bipolar disease, but I definitely have those aspects in my mind. I stopped biting my fingernails, so just, these are kind of seem like a little maybe weird or maybe inconsequential in a way, but like I have been trying to quit biting my nails since I was 10.
Yeah.
And I haven't been able to do it, so those are some of the effects. And I think, I also just experience, it's almost a spatial experience of my brain and my mind where, it always felt kind of craggy. And now the spatiality is smooth and open. And throughout my day, it's much more even, open, clear, and cool is kind of my lived experience this spring. Mm-hmm. So those are some of the experiences. Right afterwards, it was like maybe around Christmas, I was driving home too, and I drove by, like a cannabis dispensary. And normally I would drive by a cannabis dispensary and I would be like, I would start to have that PTSD response. But I just drove by and I was like, wow, that's interesting. And I realized that I could entertain ideas of like, taking a gummy or something and seeing, that kind of thing without that, without the intensity of that backlash inside me.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Just like removing that judgment layer. And like you said, being aware of something that was so, internalized. I mean, this is my first experience with MDMA, very similar. I was actually feeling some of that as you were talking and sharing is, for mine, it was, in college at a rave in Pittsburgh, right? And I took MDMA. I don't know how pure it was, but essentially, and it's a larger story, but I didn't say no to any drug because I was like toxic masculinity, I need to prove myself. I don't want to look like a pussy, right? Like I'm just going to take anything. So all that to say is I came into it afraid and I came into it feeling insecure. Right. Because I was like, I've never done this before, but I need to pretend like I know what this is. I don't want them to know that this is my first time. And I took it and I was at this, this dance and like, I just remember, I get emotional when I think about it, like seeing the fear drop away because I would go to raves. I liked the music, but I'd always be self-conscious. I had a lot of like body shame and self-hate, and I didn't think I could dance, and I was like too afraid to talk to girls. And like, even though I like thought it was cool to go, I never showed up at those in the way that I wanted to, in a way, right? Mm-hmm. But I kept kind of forcing myself. And then I remember being there and just like dancing and moving and having all that fear drop away, and just having this kind of what you're saying, like this almost like sunrise over a wide open plain of like, holy shit, I carry so much fear. Like so much fear, down to, when I talk about the nail biting, like down to my body posture. And I was like fidgeting and like all that stuff like dropped away. And I think for the first time in my entire life up to that point, I actually inhabited my body. And I felt like love, and I felt connection, and I felt confidence in a way that I'd never, ever felt confidence before. Right. And like, just to know that that was possible, and that like the way that I was living was, I'm going to say not normal, but it probably is very common, but like just not the default, I guess, right? Or I wasn't like forced to live in this way of fear and anxiety, that there is another option, was just like unbelievably powerful. To a point, I mean, I did a lot of MDMA, so I ended up chasing that dragon, and I never quite got it in the same way. But through like spiritual practice, through therapy, through like knowing that it's out there, right? Knowing that like there is a promised land. It was a really good North Star. I think without that experience, I would not have been motivated to do a lot of the self work and to just try to be more confident, I guess, right? Or try to get rid of that fear. Because probably what you're saying, like I just thought it was me. I didn't know that there was an alternative. Right.
Yeah, it just reminds me in the Dzogchen tradition of Tibetan Buddhism, they arrange the path of spiritual progress as glimpse, meditation, and action. And glimpse is that glimpse that you're talking about. Is like once we just get a taste of it, whether having it pointed out, or we're glancing at the sky and our mind drops away, or we take something like this and it just makes something happen, like that becomes the pole star now through which I can like live the life of meditation and move into a more expansive action in my life and be more relational.
Yeah, I like that framework of it, right? And I think that can be one of the powers of the psychedelic therapy, is to get that glimpse and to let people know on such like a visceral spiritual level, right? That like stuff that we took for granted, like that fear that you carried around, doesn't have to be there, right?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
So we're going to move into our final commercial break. When we come back, I think we'll chat a little bit about the industry, where you think psychedelic-assisted therapy is going, and talk to our listeners about where they might do if they want to get started or they want to learn more about it. So if you're listening, hang on in, and we'll see you on the other side.
Follow Voice America at facebook.com/Voice America for juicy updates from your favorite radio shows and podcasts.
In Mark's work with high performers and business owners, it is becoming increasingly clear to him that their biggest obstacle to success is themselves. They are experts in their field, but are dragged down by their anxiety, poor time management, inability to focus, or self-sabotage. His role is to help you overcome these emotional and organizational issues so that you can truly excel in your business and your personal life. One of the most common hurdles that he sees is perfectionism, a crippling anxiety around performance. It's a fear of not being good enough, being publicly embarrassed, or of disappointing others. These fears paralyze brilliant people and bring them to their knees. This course will help you to break free from this mental prison and have more agency in your world. In this online course, we will break down the prison of perfectionism so that you can break out of it. For more information and to sign up, visit mark-azulay.teachable.com. That's Mark, MARC-Azulay, AZOULAY.teachable.com.
It's your world. Motivate, change, succeed. VoiceAmericaEmpowerment.com.
You are listening to From the Ashes with Mark Azulay. To reach the show today, please call 1-888-346-9141. That's 1-888-346-9141. Or send an email to podcast@mark-azulay.com. Now, back to From the Ashes.
Welcome back to the show. I'm sitting here with Corey Flanders, and we're talking about kind of MDMA, the long-term effects, and as therapists, where this goes. And Corey, you were mentioning over the break, and I think it's a really important thing to start on, is that this stuff isn't a cure, right? Like you were saying before, it's a glimpse, it's a data point, it's a inspirational moment. But can you say more about that, of how you imagine experiences like this fitting into a larger journey?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and I can say, like, it's a really powerful data point.
Yeah.
And for people, I mean, think about all the people we've ever worked with, and think about ourselves in our past, right? Like how much stuff we're fighting upstream against in our own psychologies that make it so hard to even just taste goodness, or that life could be fucking happy. Like that's the most revolutionary possibility actually that we have. And it's one I'm absolutely rabid about. And to me, these medicines, molecules, they're amazing at actually cutting through all of that and showing us what can be possible, just like you illustrated so beautifully with your taking MDMA at the rave. And it's amazing. But I think that, there's I hate people who talk with it. Oh, I think there's a danger. Like, I don't really think it's a danger, but I just think that there's a little bit of a disservice, because when we talk about these things, we make it sound so great because we're talking about the great stuff. We're talking about how amazing it is, and it's totally amazing, but it has to exist. These experiences have to be understood to exist within the larger context of your whole life. And that work, it has to be ongoing, whether therapy work or meditation and other things, because these, all the psychology, the superego, everything is going to reassert itself after the molecule has left your system. And like you said, many people end up chasing the dragon, right? Or like thinking like, that's it. And now I'm going to attribute the medicine as the thing that's causing that. And that's the real potential for a disservice. And, I just wanted to, caution people to just be realistic and not think that it's a magic pill that's going to take everything away. It's not.
Yeah. I mean, it's, even when we're making that motion, I think it's like, the hand pointing at the moon thing from Buddhism, right? It's like, don't mistake the drug for the answer, right? Like the drug shows you that there's a possibility there, but you don't have to, it's not like an idol, right? You don't have to worship it. You don't have to always chase it. But it does be like, okay, there is hope. I mean, I think what these can instill in a lot of people is just hope. And like I was saying before, taking things that we took for granted and just had as base assumptions just get, in some cases, pretty violently like blasted away, like just unmistakably just destroyed, and be like, whoa, right? But there is that long-term work, whether that be through therapy or meditation, or ideally a combination of the both, or dropping baggage, doing trauma work, closing open loops, settling grudges. I mean, all the stuff that we talk about, like that's how you get there, right? You don't get there through taking more drugs. You get there by clearing out your mind of all of those things, that all the barriers that I think the drug illuminates,
That's right. Because ultimately, like, I want you to fall in love with your life as it is, in reality, not be high in order to feel alive and in love, right? So this is a step on that path, because it actually shows you how lovable you truly are and how fucking amazing life actually is, and it can be just a motivator for all the work that we need to continue to do. So, yeah,
absolutely. And I think, like, I'm a big proponent of it. I did a lot of psychedelics growing up. I attribute a lot of them to those glimpse moments that you talked about. And I think that, like, it's probably going to be overprescribed for a while. I think similar to, when Adderall came out, or when Prozac came out, or all these other big things, people were like, this was the answer to everything. And I think over time we'll learn how to systematize it, operationalize it, and figure out what it actually does help people with. I don't want to be a naysayer, and my concern, and just maybe more in Boulder, is that I think there are many people who are chasing the dragon in their own lives, and then get into this work as being a facilitator, and they kind of perpetuate that idea. right? Rather than I think what you're putting forth, which is a much more holistic, integrated version of that. These things, yeah, they're part of a journey. They aren't the answer.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. I think, for some people, who are, don't have spiritual practice, let's say, or who are just, suffering, I think that these things can be used in a very incisive way, almost like a scalpel, right? To help, like, say, somebody dealing with intense PTSD. And then I think, more broadly, it can be used for people who, have a lot of work under their belt, or, have a spiritual practice to even take things to the next level. But I think all of it really needs to be, I think holistic is the right word.
Yeah.
I think that's going to be the safest thing for people.
I think knowing what the intention is, right? I mean, set and setting. So I was talking a little bit with you before the show, but I think I'll share it here. So I do this like winter retreat thing every year where I rent a cabin alone for 10 days. And last year, or I guess this year, January of this year, right? I introduced mushrooms into that. I did a psilocybin trip, and I read the Psychedelic Explorer's Guide, which is a great book for those listening if you want to learn the research and learn kind of the methodology. It's a very kind of clinical book, but it's great. And essentially, you wear an eye mask, you are in a blanket, and you're basically just on the ground breathing, listening to usually some kind of soothing music. I chose like shamanic drumming for my music. I find drum beats like very soothing and grounding, kind of earthy. And I went in because I was feeling depressed. I was feeling really depressed towards the end of the year. And my intention was, I know mushrooms are good for depression. My intention was, I want to feel like the somatic, like body version of my depression. And I want to get to know that. Right. Like I don't want to, because I can be too cerebral. Like I don't care about the reason. I don't care about trying to figure it out. I just want to feel what it feels like to be depressed. And I want to breathe into that space. Right. That was my goal. Right.
It's amazing.
And I did that. And it was really, really powerful. Like I was on the ground, seeing the visuals and breathing and feeling like, I think, again, somebody talked about the MDMA, like how there was like a haziness on my eyes. It was hard to focus on things. I felt heavy in my body, and I was breathing into that. And I'll tell you on this show, like I was writhing on the ground. I was wheezing. I feel like I was opening up new parts of my lungs. I was twitching. Like it was a very like visceral experience. I mean, similar to when you see people that do TRE, which is trauma release exercises, right? Where they like shake and move around and like discharge something. Right.
Yeah,
I don't know what that is. I mean, historically, maybe they're like, that's a spirit or a ghost. I think now we call it, trauma or, stress. Again,
and
the why
there's
wasn't important.
There's like holotropic breath work and stuff like that, right? Like stuff that
that kind
brings
of
us into those states.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But I was just deep breathing, and I was just like breathing, like I was like, okay, here's a part of my lung, like literally my lung that feels like clenched. I'm just going to breathe because I have a yoga background. I'm just going to breathe into that spot. And before long, I was, like wheezing, crying, like it was very, very visceral.
That's amazing.
Afterwards, I felt great, and I still feel good. And it's just like I had to get something out of me. And I'm using vague terms on purpose because, again, and I know we have a lot of very intelligent listeners, like the why was the least important thing. And that was new for me.
Yeah.
Like, I want to go into experience without trying to figure it out. I just want to experience it primally. So yeah, I mean, just to share that as like a methodology that I think worked. I don't feel a need to do it. I mean, maybe I'll do it next year in December, but I don't need to go into that space all the time. But I did feel like this was like an application of that scalpel of like, I'm stuck in a rut. Nothing's really helping. Let me do this, be with the rut. And it got me out,
Yeah. Oh my God. You're just like inspiring me a lot. Like it's amazing. And I think that, psilocybin is probably on the horizon for me, but I think that my next bit is really going to be about more MDMA and, still trying to onboard this, the good feelings and work with that fear before I, go to that next step. But I think that you're really inspiring me.
Yeah. And I think like you're highlighting that it's different, different molecules for different people, different paths for different people, right? If you're listening out there, it's like, certainly consult with someone who knows what they're doing. Always, I think, go slow in the beginning, especially if you're new to psychedelics in general or don't have a spiritual practice. Like get used to what it's like to be in an altered state and move from there. As we're wrapping up, are there any other kind of tips or advice you'd give to people that are listening that maybe are are feeling inspired or want to get started on this path?
Yeah, as you just said what you said, I realized like that I don't think it would work for me to actually do any of this by myself. Actually, Mark, now that I said that, I realized that I just recently have started to utilize a little bit of cannabis gummies in order to like press a little bit into some fear. And I do that by myself. But I think for a big piece of work, I needed a container of somebody there holding space, let's say.
Object, right?
Right. So I don't know, from where I sit, I would, caution people about running out, finding something and taking it by yourself. Like really do study and your due diligence about good setting, good mindset, and good, stable, safe environment with people you trust. Because it's just going to be a different thing. It's like what you put in, you get out, right? If you're just throwing spaghetti at the wall, you're going to get a mess. But like you, I think part of the inspiration for me was just to hear like how you're like, this is what I want to do. And, the medicine tends to give it to you, which is a pretty amazing thing.
Yeah, exactly.
And people are out there doing the work too. And I know that in some states, certain things are legal and other things aren't illegal or are illegal. So it's like, you really got to be careful and do a lot of research.
Yeah, do a lot of research. And the last thing I would add before we wrap up is respect the medicine, right? Like make sure that you're feeling fairly healthy before going into it. Make sure you've eaten like a healthy meal. Make sure you've gotten enough sleep. Like you don't have any alcohol in your system, right? Things like that. Like
right.
If you want to be a powerful experience, which I think it is for a lot of people, treat it as such, right? Don't take it flippantly. Don't do it in a party environment, right? Like if you want to be medicine, treat it like medicine, I guess would be a last thing I would say.
Right.
And I think, like you said, having another person to create that container does a lot of that for you, which is nice. So Corey, these always go by super fast. We have to wrap up. Can't wait to have you on the show again. But as we're wrapping up, where can people find you online if they want to learn more about you or get in touch with you?
Well, you can find me at my website, which is www.CoreyFlanders, Corey, CoreyJ Flanders.com. And that's my main portal. And I have, of course, profiles on Psychology Today and ZenCare and other places as well.
Awesome. Yeah, guys, check him out if you want to learn more about Corey. I know he's really open and receptive to that. So thanks again for joining. And thanks again for listening. I'll see you next week, another episode of From the Ashes.
Thank you for joining host Mark Azoulay on From the Ashes. Be sure to tune in again live next Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time and 11 a.m. Pacific Time on the Voice America Empowerment Channel, or subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. Meet triumph and defeat and treat those two imposters the same.